A quick heads up before we get into episode 219. Firstly, I have to apologise for Kendra's sound. She was dialing in from Canada, and there's a bit of a crackle on the line that we weren't able to resolve. You also might hear her son in the background who's listening to Toy Story 4. So apologies for that. I think it's still very interesting, so I've decided to keep it all in. So enjoy the episode. Welcome to episode 219 of the Ski Podcast, and thanks for joining us, listener. Today, we're going to be finding out what's new at Banff Sunshine Village in Canada and looking into the history of one of the UK's oldest snow sports retailers, Ellis Brigham. Plus, and this story will run and run, we have the latest gossip on which European destination Vail Resorts are planning to buy next. Now, my name's Iain Martin. I'd like to introduce my guest today. I am delighted to welcome Kendra Scurfield back to the show for her second appearance. Kendra was last on the show in November 2023. Hi, Kendra. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. How are you today, Iain? It's lovely to join you.
Well, this is the end of our day, but I mentioned you're in Canada, different time zone from us. It's like the start of your day, right?
It is the start of my day. So it's early morning. Well, not that early now, but it's 9 a.m. and I'm drinking coffee and sipping water.
Excellent. Remind us where you are today.
Today I'm in Calgary, Alberta, but earlier this week I was in Banff at Banff Sunshine where we got our first snow of the 24-25 ski and snowboard season. So it was very exciting to see about 20 centimeters land on our Rocky Mountain paradise.
Excellent. Spoiler on that. I was going to ask you about that, but that's fantastic to hear there's snow already, and we love August snow. We'll come back to that. Joining us for the first time, my second guest today, I'm delighted to welcome Mark Brigham from, well, you guessed it, the UK retailer Ellis Brigham. Hi, Mark. How are you?
Hi, Iain. Yeah, good. Thank you.
Whereabouts are you today?
I'm in Bristol.
Excellent. Well, a question I always like to start off with our guests is to ask when you skied or snowboarded last. So, Kendra, I'm guessing you were probably on snow most recently. When and where was that?
The last time I was on snow was at our year-end celebration, Slush Cup. It is the giant party we host every May long weekend. Yeah, we have this big giant party with 6,000 people. That was where they hit a jump and try and skim across a big pool of water. That was the last day I skied. It was actually pretty fun.
Yeah, I've seen lots of videos of that sort of thing, and generally a lot of people falling in the water. But what a great way to finish off the season. What about yourself, Mark? When were you last on snow?
It was April, Easter week, and it was Morzine, France. It was a cracking week actually. It was quite late season, but we had some decent snow. In fact, we had real mix of weather. We had snow, rain, and then blazing hot sunshine towards the end. So
possibly a bit ironic. I mean, you went later in the season. A lot of people, perhaps in Morzine earlier in the season, wouldn't have had those conditions at all. I was out at Easter as well, and I think it's possibly a trend we're seeing that Easter seems to be more reliable for snow than earlier in the year, and certainly from a family holiday point of view, it's much more affordable than going at half term. So, that is an option. Now, I'm just going to move on to a few news items. Firstly, well, I mentioned it in the introduction there. Vail Resorts. In the last episode, we were talking about how there was possible interest in Vail Resorts in Teen. Teen are leaving Compagnie des Alpes. I mean, possibly I made up that rumour. I don't know. But there is some genuine, what would you call it? A genuine story about Vail Resorts being linked to Laax Flims in Switzerland. The resort themselves have gone very quiet, but they fit into that type of resort that Vail Resorts are looking for, in that it's a single company that's owned by a small number of individuals, and they would be able to buy the ski hire companies and mountain resorts at the same time. Both Laax and Vail Resorts are making no comment at the moment. It probably means, I would guess, there's some kind of negotiations going on, maybe some kind of due diligence. And maybe in the case of Verbier, long-time listeners will remember, I interviewed Laurent Vaucher from Télé Verbier about the possibility that Vail Resorts were buying Verbier, and he categorically denied it. But we know that there was some conversation that was going on prior to that. So that one will be interesting. I also noticed that another company that owns several resorts called Powder in North America are selling a few of their resorts. And that's a bit closer to home for you, Kendra. I thought that was kind of interesting. Any thoughts on, why they're doing that?
Seems like they're divesting many of their key assets, from Killington to Mount Bachelor, Silver Star in British Columbia. I don't want to incriminate myself for speculation, which is what I'm doing 100% of the time, but it almost seems as if they're looking to exit the ski industry with how much dilution they are planning.
Right. Okay. And the Killington, is it called Pico, the adjoining resort over there? That was like a management buyout or a community buyout?
Yes, I don't know too much about it, but I was quite surprised. We joke in North America, a lot of the Eastern skiers will call Killington the beast from the East. And in North America, the better skiing, I'm biased, but the better skiing factually is on the West. We have the big Canadian Rockies, we have the American Rockies, the high peaks, the steeps, the better snow, but Killington is the beast from the East, where a lot of great ski racers and athletes come out of that area.
For sure. Well, I'll put a link in the show notes, listener, so you can look into those stories a little bit more if you're interested. I'll also put a link in there about there were some floods in St Anton recently in the last couple of weeks. Again, if you've been listening to the show over the summer, you'll be aware that there were floods in Zermatt and around Ladies Alp as well, quite significant. Maybe part of climate change, the very large amounts of rainfall that are coming down. But the good news is that the resort is completely unaffected in terms of how the winter is looking. There's no issue in relation to lifts. Some of the walking trails were closed for a little while. And a more positive story, which is very interesting to me, long-time listeners to the show will know I'm very keen on train travel. And there's a company called European Sleeper who've been operating for a while now. They've been operating a night service that goes from Brussels through Holland into Berlin and then extended it to Prague recently. They're adding in a new service. It's going to go from Brussels down to Innsbruck and actually through the Dolomites south to Bolzano and ultimately through to Venice. Currently, you can get an overnight train from Amsterdam, Paris into Austria with Nightjet, the Austrian train service. But this is the first time that there's been anything that will connect through to the Dolomites. And I'm very keen to try this. Again, I've said on the show many times I'd like to go to the Dolomites, and it's getting there by train makes it slightly more difficult. So Bolzano is about an hour and a half away from Corvara or Cortina. So my plan is this winter to try it out. I'll put links to both of those in the show notes. And listener, you can find out a little bit more for yourself. It's actually due to go on sale, their tickets for that new European Sleeper service on the 1st of September. So if I publish this tomorrow, today is Friday the 30th. If you're listening and you're keen, you'll be able to get those tickets for yourself. Mark, I'd like to turn to you if that's okay. Regular listeners will know all the equipment special episodes we had last winter were sponsored by Ellis Brigham, and I'd really like to thank you for that. We've got more coming up for this autumn. The first one will be in about a month's time. But today I wanted to explore a little bit more about the company, Ellis Brigham, because it's over 90 years old now, and there was a clue when I introduced you. You are Mark Brigham. It's still family owned as a business. I wondered if I could ask you how it started, how it came about.
So, as you said, we reached the grand old age of 90 last year, and it was 1933 when we had our first shop in North Manchester. It was my grandfather who ran the shop, and at that time, skiing wasn't really on many people's radars in the UK, although people were skiing. Yeah, so it was mostly geared up for kind of outdoor gear. And my grandfather, who's named Frederick Ellis Brigham, he sort of made his living from fixing footwear and being a kind of the go-to man for kind of outdoor footwear. And as the kind of years went on and it came to the sort of war era, then there was a lot of ex-army surplus gear that he would stock. Yeah, he made a name for himself by being kind of very much on the ball with this kind of gear.
I understand when I was looking into it that people would go well out of their way to go to the shop because he was a very keen cyclist, I think. So he had like walking boots and cycling shoes as well.
That's right. Yeah, I think he was sort of a cycling fanatic. He was often seen cycling around the Yorkshire Dales, competing on weekends and things like that. So yeah, very much into his outdoor sports and had this kind of inquisitive nature when it came to footwear specifically. And I think he was a sort of footwear salesman prior to setting up his own sort of shop, which sort of drove this knowledge for footwear specifically.
And he was an innovator as well, because he designed his own, I think it was called the Brigham plate, these specific soles for walking shoes.
Yeah, that's right. And driven by his kind of knowledge of footwear and his sort of desire to be outdoors, and, you know, a lot of his friends at the time were kind of climbing, he came up with this configuration for a sort of climbing plate, because at the time, sort of outdoor footwear was quite primitive, I think. So with a design friend of his, he developed this climbing plate called the Brigham Peacock plate, which was then seen on rock in the Peak District.
Oh, and you mentioned, he was doing repairs as well. I saw an older photo of the shop with a sign in the window saying, "Bring your repairs here," which makes him way ahead of his time, because, in the last episode, we were talking in episode 218 to Dominic Showers from Arcteryx, all about their ReBird program and the repair program they offer and things like that. I mean, possibly, these days people, maybe it's the cost of living crisis, but people are more into sustainability. But I think probably in the mid-30s, people genuinely wanted their products to last for as long as they possibly could.
Absolutely. It's become quite a thing now to sort of repair rather than replace your gear. But back in the 1930s, it was almost a necessity to make your gear last longer. He was often seen in the basement of the shop, way into the night, sort of repairing people's gear, ready to give them it back the following morning as they walked past the door on the way to work. Yeah, he was quite a trailblazer, really, although he wouldn't have known it at the time. But yeah.
And a very hard worker as well, by the sounds of it. And you said that after the Second World War, he started dealing quite a lot in army surplus kit. And I think when it came to the 50s, there was a lot of European climbing kit that started to come to the UK. Products started to improve. And sometime around then, his sons, I'm guessing one of them must be your father, took over the business.
That's right. He had two sons and a daughter. So Bob and Ellis being my father. Bob was the oldest of the two. He started to get involved in the business at an early age. I think he was about 18, 19. And really what they used to do was they used to cycle up to the army surplus. I think it was a kind of a war hangar place in Manchester where the planes would come in, and he'd grab stuff from there and then take it back to the shop and sell it. Because at the time, that was probably the most cutting edge stuff you could get, was the stuff that the army were using. And then, like you say, in the kind of 50s, early 60s, development started happening. Clothing started to become more breathable, gone with the whole tweed knit sort of jumpers that when they got wet, they were just heavy as, and stuff started to get a bit lighter, a bit more comfortable, I guess, when you're outdoors. So that was really a turning point.
So gradually the company then started to grow, because he had his shop in North Manchester, but in the 60s, you opened up a bigger store in Manchester and started bringing out a catalogue. Again, I saw an older picture. I don't know if this is the right one or not, but on the front of it said the Mountaineers Gadgeteer, bits and pieces for climbers and mountaineers, presumably.
Absolutely, yeah. And towards the end of the 50s, early 60s, skiing started becoming very much more accessible. There was a lot more package holidays that were coming online. So suddenly you were seeing a lot more people going skiing from the UK. So alongside that, they were at the forefront of recognizing that trend, setting up somewhere in Manchester, in the centre of Manchester, where people could go and get latest ski gear. And it's interesting, when I speak to my dad about the stories, he'd travel over to Europe to pick up the latest gear and then take it back to the UK and then sell it in the shop. And then, they just made a name for themselves with, they were out there climbing, skiing, even had a nightclub in the 60s in central Manchester.
Ellis Brigham nightclub.
It was done in a kind of, I guess you'd need to go like an Austrian themed kind of nightclub right next door to the shop. So, and they had some big bands at the time come and play there. I think that decade of the 60s was quite a pivotal decade for them in terms of getting the name out there and developing the business.
Right. Okay. Well, I mean, you mentioned that skiing started to develop in the 60s, and certainly, my parents started skiing in the 60s, actually met in a ski resort, but things really started to develop. And I guess it probably mimicked the ski industry in itself through the 70s, and the number of shops went up from 4 to 8. And by the mid to late 80s, what you might call the glory days of the ski industry, we've discussed before, all the chalet companies like Blade and Lions and Ski Super Travel, etc., who were around at the time. And you were producing, the catalogue then was much more than the Mountaineers Gadgeteer. it had the very grandiose sounding name, the White Book.
Yeah, the White Book came around. I think it was the sort of 80s. It was basically chock full of, if you can imagine the Argos catalogue, that's what that was to a skier, really. It was just everything you wanted that winter. And it was great. It would land on people's doorsteps and they'd suddenly be transported into that kind of wonderful winter wonderland in sort of September, really. Yeah, we've still got loads of archived copies. I mean, we stopped producing the White Book 4 or 5 years ago. Yeah, we still get requests now saying, "Oh, when are you bringing back the White Book?" It ended up being, I think, 200 pages of ski gear. It was fantastic. It was very much
fantastic. But having produced a few brochures when I was at Crystal Holidays, I'm aware of how difficult it is publishing something of that size. And there's so much detail in there and so much work that goes into it. I guess the advent of the internet, was pretty amazing, really. I mean, obviously, you had a website to start off with. Now you can buy anything you want on the website itself. There are a couple of other developments over the years in between. Snowboards arrived, I guess, in the late 80s, started to sell them. And you have a separate store or a separate brand called the Snowboard Asylum.
That's right, yeah. In the late 80s, sort of developing as a sort of, I guess, a subculture in Scotland, really. And then we recognised snowboarding was going to be quite big, and we decided to dedicate space in the shop to it and give it its own kind of house, if you like, under the TSA, the Snowboard Asylum name. And it's just grown since then, really.
Yeah, and Kendra, you put your hand up just then. I think you're going to tell me you started snowboarding in the 80s then, right?
No, I didn't. I'm not that old. Mark, your story is absolutely incredible. I am a snowboarder. I love snowboarding. But to me, I don't remember learning to ski. I skied before I could walk, and it was something I always knew how to do. But snowboarding, it was so hard. It was so different. I had to work at it, and I loved the challenge. And Banff Sunshine is actually the first resort in Western Canada to allow snowboarding. So it is our 40th anniversary of snowboarding this year. And we actually hosted the first ever World Snowboard Championships back in 1985 and 1986, which it's amazing to think that snowboarding, a fringe sport, has grown up. It's a middle-aged person.
Well, that's true. And in fact, maybe some of those middle-aged people on the point of giving up snowboarding now, moving back to skiing. But it's interesting what you say about that timing-wise. I mean, you think it might seem strange to listeners now to know that some ski resorts banned snowboarding. There was no snowboarding allowed.
Alta in Utah is still 100% skier only.
Well, we don't buy that, skiers versus snowboarders thing. But one thing you did mention there is that I did a ski season. My first ski season was in 88, 89. And there was one guy there who'd done a season in Jasper, not too far away from you in Banff National Park. And he'd been snowboarding over there and had his snowboard. And everyone's like, "Oh, this snowboard looks quite good." We were going out on monoboards, at the time. He had his snowboard. And so interesting to see how the Snowboard Asylum, you went down that route and created a separate brand. And I think there's probably a lot of sense to that. Now your big flagship store is in Covent Garden, and that used to be the YHA store.
That's right. We've always had a store in Covent Garden since the early 80s. And then we looked for more space and found it opposite as YHA sort of moved out. So we moved into there, and now we were able to stock a lot more kit over a bigger amount of space, 2 floors. And then we developed an ice wall in there at one point. We were sort of at the forefront when the Snowdome opened in Tamworth. We backed it with a store there. That was one of the first, that was the first indoor snow slope. We could see this was going to be a growing trend. And then since we've opened more stores in other indoor snow slopes as well. So the shops are a really important part of what we are and who we are and what we do.
And I think now there's 24 stores across the UK. But it's interesting what you said there about supporting the Snowdome, because I don't know if you listened to the episode, but I interviewed Stu Brass a little while ago, who is the guy who set up the Brits and has recently brought it back. And he was actually, extremely complimentary or thankful to Ellis Brigham, because he said that without your support, he wouldn't have been able to bring that competition back.
We obviously worked with Stu on the Brits last year, and then the great news is he's bringing it back to Marehofen in spring 2025, and we're partnered with him on that alongside the Snowboard Asylum. And we've always loved the Brits, right from, I think it was the 90s when he was sort of doing it and fostering the kind of the scene around snowboarding and kind of freestyle skiing at the time. Yeah, it was great to be able to get back and work with him again.
I appreciate it as well. I'm looking forward to seeing how the Brits get on back out in the Alps again. Well, I think Ellis Brigham, I noticed they won Outdoor Retailer of the Year at the Outdoor Trade Show earlier this year. So congratulations on that. And I just wanted to remind listeners, the equipment episodes I'm doing with Al Morgan, who's our equipment specialist, they will start with the best skis for winter 2024-25 on the 27th of September. And then we'll be producing an episode roughly every fortnight. It'll vary throughout the winter. And we'll look at boots and jackets and gloves and all the important things to you through the winter. And we're also going to add on a special episode about ski touring this winter as well. And they will be sponsored by Ellis Brigham. So thank you very much for that, Mark. Kendra, I'm going to come back to you now. As you already observed, actually, I thought one of the reasons that the two of you would make a nice pairing on a single episode of the podcast is I know that yours is a family business as well. And you were explaining to us about how you went over to Europe when you were younger, with your father, and how he set up the resort as well. Definitely, that was a reason for having you both on. I wanted to know if I could ask you a little bit about the skiing. You said you skied in May, right at the end of the season for the slushing, and you've already had snow for this winter as well. But it is one of the longer seasons around in Canada, right?
We have the longest on glacier season in Canada. So we're Canada's highest ski and snowboard resort. Our base is at 7,200 feet. We're gondola accessed only. So you do fly into Calgary International Airport. We're quite popular with Brits, especially on working holidays. So because of our proximity to the mountains, because of our high elevation, because of our northern longitude, we tend to be a magnet for snow. And we'll typically see snow at least 10 months out of the year. It was nice to see an August dusting.
And did you say to me that you had 20 centimetres of snow this week?
I mean, we don't measure snow quite this early, but it was a lot. It was more substantial than 10. My estimate is about 20 centimetres.
Yeah, and I think I'm also right in saying you talk about the reliability of the snow, 10 months of the year coverage. Quite unusual if this is true, but you don't have any snow cannons there at Banff Sunshine Village?
We have two.
Right.
Two. For our 3,580 plus acres of terrain, we have two. We do not make snow. We actually use very little water. We try and conserve as much as possible as our way of being environmentally sustainable. But the snow cannons are really for insurance purposes. We'll use them in high traffic zones at the very bottom of our ski out or in high traffic areas in our village just to create that more solid base. But no, we don't make much snow. Very unusual.
You referred a little earlier by saying it's all gondola serve skiing, but one of the reasons I wanted to have you on is you do have a new lift this winter, quite a big investment. I wondered if you could tell us about that.
We have a new lift. So back in 1988, shortly after we allowed snowboarders, which going back to that is actually quite funny, there was all this news articles about when snowboarders first came in, and a lot of skiers were like, well, we can't trust them. We don't want them on the hill. They're ruining the sport. And snowboarding actually brought back the freestyle movement. And with that, there's a lot of ways in looking to kind of modernize skiing and snowboarding. And one of the ones that we went on and an approach we did was trying to get the fastest ride time. So Canada is not necessarily thought of as a tropical destination. I'm not going to play niceties around our weather. It can be cold, but winter should be cold. And so we wanted to get people up the chair as fast as possible. And back in 88, we opened the first high-speed quad in the Canadian Rockies, which was Angel Express. This year, we've decided to replace that 35-year-old chairlift or rebuild it with a brand new 6-passenger heated direct drive bubble lift from Poma Lightner with the Evo technology. It will be the first of its kind in North America.
Yeah, okay. I mean, I love those lifts. You don't get them in so many places, but this is one of the ones where the seats are heated, right?
Yeah, I joke it's got footrests, it's got the heated seats. I joke the only thing that's missing is the Nespresso machine.
So will that increase the speed and uplift capacity?
It will improve the guest experience. Angel is one of our primary lifts. It's the first lift you see when you get off of the chair. it will make it more easy for families to all ski together, and especially for some of those newer to skiing who might not be as familiar with Canadian weather.
And earlier on, we had a little discussion about Vail Resorts, and obviously the relevance of that really is the Epic Pass. There are a lot of passes. I think our listeners, are gradually building up their information. Banff Sunshine Village is on the Ikon and Mountain Collective passes. Is that correct?
We are on the Ikon and Mountain Collective Pass, as are the other Ski Big 3 resorts. The Mountain Collective Pass is an amazing pass for the Western Canadian region if people are looking to do a ski safari. I highly recommend it, as it grants you 2 free days at a lot of major resorts, including Sunshine, Lake Louise, Marmot Basin, and Jasper. And this winter, I'm going to make it my personal mission to get back to Jasper and support the community of Jasper. The town was devastated by a horrific wildfire that destroyed about 30% of the town, and the community is rallying together. So any support for the Jasper community with your visitation is hugely appreciated. The pass also includes Panorama, Revelstoke, and Sun Peaks.
Okay, so the ski safari trip, if you were, and just to point out, we're sort of talking about flying into Calgary there. It's Alberta, and I think you told me in the previous episode of the podcast before, but Banff Sunshine Village kind of overlaps from Alberta into BC. Is that right?
We're right on the continental divide, so you can ski 2 provinces in one run. Oh, wow! Oh, that's funny. Buzz was learning to fly.
Mountain Collective would be great if you're going to do a ski safari through Canada, out of Calgary, let's say. The Ikon Pass is obviously much bigger. We've seen quite a few North Americans over here in Europe this year who've been using the Ikon Pass to ski in Chamonix or to ski in Zermatt. But Banff Sunshine Village is on the Ikon Pass as well.
We are on the Ikon Pass as well, and the Ikon Pass is another great product. It is a great product and definitely something to use. You can use it as a primary pass in your primary destination. Alterra's majority of resorts are in the U.S., so it is great for American skiers looking to travel to Canada or to Europe.
Yeah. Or, for example, if you were in the lucky situation where you were taking a holiday in Chamonix or Zermatt, and then you wanted to go over and ski in North America, you could fly into Calgary and go and ski the big 3 as well, right?
100% you could. If you are in one of those lucky positions that you can ski wherever you want, whenever you want, the Ikon Pass is an incredible pass.
Yeah, well, I happen to know a lot of our listeners to the show. The type of people who like to listen to an hour of conversation about skiing are people who are very keen on skiing, and they take a lot of holidays. So it wouldn't surprise me if someone, one of our listeners out there, would be doing that. And I think I'm right in saying as well, so Ikon have got a stand at the London Ski and Snowboard Show, which is coming up in October this autumn. And Ski Big 3 are going to have a presence there as well. Will we be seeing you over here in London, or will it be another representative of the resorts?
I believe Ski Big 3 will. I believe a colleague, Pete Woods, and his team will be there representing the Banff destinations. Unfortunately, I won't be able to join this year. I would love to in the future. It's always fun to see the London Ski and Snowboard Show.
Okay, well, that's really interesting. Thanks so much again for joining us, Kendra, and telling us about that. We're just going to move on to the close then just now. I enjoy all feedback about the show. I like to know what you think, especially about our features. So please contact me on social at the Ski Podcast or by email, theskipodcast@gmail.com. Had some feedback from Shazza. I think this was on Spotify. She said, love these conversations to get us excited for the ski season. We went to Dolomites with Inspired Italy last season. It was an amazing adventure, great terrain, food and people. So Shazza, I'm hoping to follow in your footsteps out to the Dolomites if I can get that European sleeper train down to Bolzano sorted out. This is a bit of a belated one, but Jay Rowe said, excellent interview with Bodie Miller. That was episode 189. So that must have been sitting in my spam box and didn't see it for a while. Darren Davis, he asked a question about train travel. He said, I'm really interested in exploring train travel to the Alps, but I can't find a way to get to London that doesn't overprice the holiday or make it too complex. Well, unfortunately, Darren, if you don't live near London, it can be tricky because actually, if you're going to travel by train, you've got to go from London through to Paris or Brussels to start off with. And if you don't live near London, it can be tricky. The only advice I can really offer you is it's obviously cheaper if you book a long time in advance for your UK side of things. And you can actually stay overnight near St Pancras. I've stayed in a couple of Airbnbs about 5 minutes from St Pancras, and they weren't overly expensive. They were kind of £50 or £60, and they were probably better than you might expect for that in central London, but you don't have to pay through the nose if you don't want to. Now, listener, if you've listened this far into the show, maybe you already subscribe to the Ski Podcast, but if you don't, here's a request. Just pause for a second, possibly literally, look in the app of your choice that you're listening to this podcast on and click subscribe or follow. And that way, you'll never miss another episode. And we have a lot coming up through this autumn and into winter, ranging from interviews with people like Chemi Alcott or Vicky Gosling, CEO of GB Snowsport. We've got all those equipment specials coming up and all of our regular episodes as well, which will include special episodes from the London Ski and Snowboard show within that. Now, our next episode will be on the 13th of September. That will be that special interview with BBC Ski Sunday presenter and four-time Olympian Chemi Alcott. So make sure you tune in for that. In the meantime, you can follow me at Skipedia and the podcast at The Ski Podcast. There are now 224 episodes of The Ski Podcast to catch up with, and exactly 100 of those were listened to in the last week. Now, you can do that too. There's so much to listen to in that back catalogue. Just go to theskipodcast.com, search around the tags and categories, and you're bound to find something of interest to you. I also noticed in the stats that while 47% of our listeners in the last week were in the UK, 15% were in the States, meaning 37% of the rest of you are around the rest of the globe, including the UAE, South Korea, and Argentina.
Wow.
So I'd like to thank my guest for today. Kendra, thank you very much.
Thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure talking with you.
Always good to speak to you, Kendra. And Mark, thank you very much.
Ian, nice to meet you, Kendra.
And I'd just like to wish you both the best with your family businesses, because we love that within the ski industry. Finally, listener, I'd like to thank you for joining us wherever in the world you're listening right now. And until next time, goodbye.